the experience of writing Startup Nation and more of what has happened since the book has come out, and actually spending a lot of time traveling to different countries and speaking about the book to many different audiences, dealing with a lot of press, dealing with a lot of visitors. I really do think it's given me a sort of a unique perspective on this issue. And it's actually a perspective that I didn't have before I started working on Startup Nation. My mindset before starting working on the book was, I think, pretty conventional about the issue and how to deal with it. And in fact, most of my career, whether it's 10 years on Capitol Hill, working as a foreign policy aide in the Congress, the U.S. Congress, or the following 12 years or so at the Jerusalem Post, writing editorials and columns. I actually counted up how much I wrote at the Jerusalem Post, and it ended up to about 3 books worth of writing of daily journalism, most of which was, I have to say, probably most of which was dedicated to fighting the good fight, essentially against de-legitimization. But now I have a completely different perspective on the issue. And that's because, for example, when Dan and I were writing this book, it wasn't meant to be, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and said, this book is the best Hasbara Israel ever had. And I often sort of correct them and basically say, well, it's actually great Hasbara, but it's not Hasbara. It's actually true. It's actually a legitimate reality that is interesting on its own case. It's not about making Israel's case. If we had been making Israel's case directly, nobody would have bought this book. Nobody would be interested in this book. It wasn't about making Israel's case. It was about describing and understanding a real phenomenon, that Israel has more startups than any place outside Silicon Valley, that Israel produces almost as many startups as all of Europe. All of Europe about 700, 800 startups, Israel about 500 startups a year. Venture capital, there was just an innovation index that came out from some institute that put us #1, but we knew that. I mean, we're raising 2.5 times as much venture capital per capita as the United States, 30 times as much as Europe. And just to give you a relevant example, Norway, not considered the most friendly place in the world to Israel. The sovereign wealth fund in Norway alone invests $1 billion in Israeli companies. This is while some Norwegians are busy trying to promote disinvestment towards Israel. So there was a legitimate story here, and the book is about what makes Israel so innovative. And we made no attempt to hide. In fact, we were very upfront about the fact that Dan and I were pro-Israel people. I live here, and Dan has always been openly pro-Israel. We weren't hiding the fact that we're pro-Israel. It's a pro-Israel book in the sense that it's positive about Israel. In fact, it's so positive that I think Haaretz was difficult for Haaretz to stomach the book, but in the end, even Haaretz was amazing. Treated the thing very nicely. But yeah, it's a pro-Israel book. So we were expecting that when the book came out, somebody would come out of the woodwork so that we would get hit by some anti-Israel types. There was almost nothing. I can't think of a single anti-Israel review of the book. I can't think of a single, major piece of media of any kind that was basically negative about the book. The closest thing I can think of is down to the talkback level. You get some things saying, little talkback saying, oh well, it's just because they get all this American aid. But that was basically it. And Dan and I have been speaking all over the place. No protests, nothing. And for example, I was meeting with a group of South African journalists, and the person who brought them, took me aside right before and said, well, this is South Africa, and these journalists, they kind of hang out with Al-Qaeda. They might not be so fair. And so I talk to them, and I give my usual thing about the book, part of which is that a big factor in all this is the Israeli military, and the fact that it had a tremendous influence, cultural influence on the people here, and that it's made them more driven and more willingness to take risks and all these factors. And nothing, no pushback, and complete comfort with the fascination with talking about how the military relates to all this from these journalists. And just now the book has come out in Turkish. It's going to come out in Arabic. It's coming out in about 14, 15 languages. It's already out in Chinese and Korean and Taiwan, and a separate Chinese edition in Portuguese in Brazil and Russian, in Hebrew, yes, Hebrew, English, Czech, Bulgarian, Serbian. It's coming out soon in German, French, Italian. I'm trying very hard to get Spanish. Japanese I want very much, and that I think we're pretty much done. Chinese, yes, Chinese is one of the first. In fact, this is brand new. The past couple of days I got an email from my friend at the Chinese publisher, and she told me good news. The Communist Party chief of Nanjing, a city of about 6 million people, recommended your book, and we received an order for 10,000 copies. Because this is for their training program in Nanjing.
A management training program?
Well, they're kind of cadre training program, and so I think there's potential. It's in its 5th printing in China. It's in its 5th printing also in Korean. And I was very briefly in China. I was just when the book came out, but I came later in Korea after the book had been out for a while, and I spoke to large business audiences, no Jewish audiences. There is no Jewish community in Korea that I know of. Well, many of whom had already read the book. They already wanted to know the next step, and they were very eager, very hungry to find out more. The government is pushing innovation very strongly. So what does all this mean for this fight against delegitimization? I think we need to put this fight into context. I think we need to realize that every minute that we spend on fighting our enemies, which we need to do, and I'm not saying we don't need to do it, but every minute we spend on fighting our enemies is a minute we're not using, it seems, to address our friends and to address, I would say, let's say there's 10% of the people who are the haters who are behind the BDS and all this stuff, at most. And then there's another 10% on the other end of the spectrum who are great friends of Israel, who we tend to ignore and even tend to be uncomfortable with. And then there's about 80% in the middle who are open-minded, who are completely receptive to a positive story about Israel that doesn't have to do with the conflict. And not only receptive, but eager They actively want to know about this. And actually, I think that our enemies are a little smarter than we are, because, you know, why, if you think about why are we not getting pushback from the haters against the book? Because maybe at some level they realize that if they engage on this issue, on Startup Nation, they're wasting their time. That's not their issue. Their issue is, you know, delegitimization and the conflict. So they're smart. They stay on their territory. We're dumb. I'm sorry. We focus on their territory, which is when they're attacking us, we're constantly responding, and that's all we do. Rather than focusing on our strength and going after the 80% in the middle, we're open-minded. And, you know, look, if we can do both, that's fine. But I think that trying to address and trying to bring in and trying to excite the open-minded and the positive should take more of our time and effort than being on the defensive with the 10% of the haters who are trying to distract us from doing anything positive about Israel. I also think that in strategic terms, there's tremendous potential for this perspective, because when you think about, look at it this way, and Avi, you know this from your diplomatic experience, Mike also you. When you try to get, say, the Europeans to cut off their trade with Iran, you're up against an economic lobby. You're up against economic interests. What are those economic interests? Well, you know, Iran, 1% of Europe's exports are to Iran. And that stupid 1% is enough to create an economic interest that makes it hard to impose tough economic sanctions on Iran. So it shows that a small economic interest can have a big political impact. Well, Israel can actually have a substantial economic interest, can become a substantial economic interest for Europe and other countries if we increase our economic footprint. We're already, I think, a significant trade partner of different countries. But imagine, let's say, if the ecosystem that's developed between the U.S. and Israel were to develop between Europe and Israel. What's happened is that every major tech company in the United States basically is in Israel in a major way. But if you look, and there's Dani Katarivas, has a nice presentation on this, a slide where he looks at foreign direct investment in Israel. 80% of the foreign direct investment, which is basically the R&D centers, the Intels and Microsoft and Googles of the world here, 80% of that is from the United States. Where's the rest of the world? Where is Asia? Where is Europe? There's no reason why the companies, well, you can say that part of this difference, part of this delta is because American companies are more tech-oriented. That explains part of it. But it doesn't explain an 80-20 ratio between the U.S. and the rest of the world. There's a tremendous potential for copying the ecosystem that's developed between the U.S. and Israel, between Europe and Israel, between Latin America and Israel, between Asia and Israel. And if we did that, our place in the world would change. We would not be in the same diplomatic position we are now, which is a position in which kicking Israel is considered a freebie, has no economic ramifications, no economic implications. It's just free moralizing. What if there was more of an economic interest at stake? Suddenly you might see a different picture. So I think, besides being a great thing for the Israeli economy, which is a good thing in its own right, that if we worked harder on using our economic potential, it actually could be an effective tool on the diplomatic and political level, including on delegitimization. So, So I guess that's also, I think that there's another aspect here, and that is the question of Jewish identity, which of course is very much of interest, I think, to this institute, and I think is also, you know, related to the delegitimization issue. And here I'm kind of beginning to get into the more general aspect of the institute as a whole. But let's say if you're thinking about delegitimization on campus, again, you have, you know, that small percentage of haters that you're fighting, and you have that vast majority in the middle that's open-minded, including the Jews, including the non-Jews, and you have also that percentage of friends. What's so powerful about the international response to this book is that it shows that there is a fascination with innovation, with solving world problems, that has nothing to do with being Jewish. That has nothing to do with Jewish history or Israel or any of the, or the conflict or anything like that. It is built in right now to our society, our place in history. We're in a world that's moving very quickly and where the premium innovation is growing. And every country in the world almost is trying to figure out how to become, every country, every company, how to become more innovative. You have Obama has launched Startup America. Cameron in Britain has launched Startup Britain. Practically every country you go to has some program that's to promote innovation, that's trying to promote startups. Everybody is talking about it, whether it's Europe or Asia or Singapore, countries that are high up in math scores and whatever, like Singapore, countries that are developed like Europe, countries that are developing in Latin America. It doesn't matter where, they're all into it. And this, of course, is ironic because we Israelis tend to focus on why can't we build big companies? And we tend to ignore the fact that we're good at startups. We can't take that for granted. But I'm telling you again, with this international perspective that I've developed, while Israelis have what we call in the book Nokia envy, they kept asking me, where's our Nokia, where's our big company? In Finland, and elsewhere, in Korea, in Singapore, and all over the place, they have startup envy. They want to know how to do startups, and there's nowhere else better to figure that out than here. But even deeper than that, going back to the campus, I mean, what is it that the people we care about care about? They care about changing the world. They care about fixing world problems. They care about the environment. They care about making a difference. And that's all about innovation and what Israel is doing in the startup nation sphere. And if you start talking, and I have direct evidence of this, of people who were, all caught up in the conflict, that's the only way they thought of Israel. The minute they start realizing that the startup nation is a fount of creative energy that goes into startups, that goes into innovation, that goes into solving world problems, that goes into the arts, that goes into culture. When they understand that, it changes their perspective on Israel completely. And particularly with Jews, it's an incredible potential hook on the level of birthright. And I think there needs to be a very strong intersection with birthright and Massah. Using the startup nation perspective, once you've got them in the door, to show people that Israel is about innovation, is about solving world problems. This is going to be the first country in the world to get off the oil this year. We're going to start on a mass level, switching over to electric cars. In a few years, we're going to sell, Better Place is going to sell 50,000 cars here. That's a quarter of the number of cars bought every year, new cars. So it's going to be probably the best-selling new car in Israel. Denmark is doing this at the same time. Australia is about a year later. It's going to show that it's for big countries as well. It's not just for small countries. And this is the beginning. And this is just one thing, one enormous global problem that we're tackling. We can tackle others. And it's tremendously inspiring. And you can see it. You can come here, you can see it, you can feel it. And this needs to be the new narrative. This needs I'm not saying replace the old narrative, but the way I put it in that Jerusalem Post interview that I did is, you know, the old narrative is they tried to kill us, we won, that's right. That's, you know, the Jewish holiday. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. Well, we can't just be talking about they tried to kill us narrative. And we're standing up to that. It has to be about what we're doing positive in this world. And if we weren't doing anything positive in this world, if we had to make up something, that would be another story. But we don't have to make up anything. This is real. And this is what we should be talking about, because when you're fighting de-legitimization, you can essentially only, if you win the argument, you're essentially getting up to zero. If someone attacked you, you're at -5. If you win the argument, you're up to 0. You can't get in positive territory that way. All you can do is get people to think that you're basically okay, but nobody's going to like you because you're basically okay. You're not doing anything positive by being basically okay. If you want to get into positive territory with people, whether it comes to Jewish identity or diplomatically or whatever way, you need to talk about something positive and real. That's something that they can relate to in a much deeper way than they can when you're talking about the conflict, which ultimately is not their conflict. I'll just finish with that another aspect of this is that it can revitalize the Jewish community institutionally. Because, and I've been trying to give this message to federations. If you look at federations, at the basic kind of institutional base of American Jewry, it's drying up. I mean, it's a generational thing. Yeah, they're making a little progress, with young leadership and stuff like that. They're trying. But if you give you the more prosaic level and then the broader level, the more prosaic level is that when you speak to a federation group, if you ask people to raise their hands, how many of you are in tech? It's basically almost 0. And yet, there's a lot of Jews in tech in the United States. A lot of the top Facebook billionaires, including Zuckerberg, of course, themselves are Jewish. There's Jews all throughout the tech world, and yet they're not involved in federation or the Jewish community because they have no connection. I mean, so this is a way to make a connection, but it's more fundamental than that. It's instead of the connection between the Jewish community, say Jewish businessmen who are the ones who are contributing to federations, instead of that connection being only one of philanthropy, what if there were one of business? And also, what if instead of there being a mainly philanthropy connection between the Jewish community, what if there was connections on every level of creative energy in this country, like universities, like hospitals, joint research programs with hospitals and universities, whatever it is. The amazing thing when you start getting into the Startup Nation story is that whatever you're into in America or elsewhere, whether you're into, whether it's business, whether it's some sort of community action, whether it's university or hospital, whatever, there's something exciting going on in Israel that's exactly related to what you're into. And yet we don't really make these connections. We're barely begun to make these connections. There's huge potential for doing joint projects projects that are not basically philanthropy, they're much more joint projects. And it's true also in the arts and culture. And so I'll just leave it there.